AP Microeconomics, welcome to video 3. In this video, we're going to talk really about how to find profits when you've already established where the profit maximizing output and price are. So that's going to be the key for this video here. So as you see on this on the screen, we have how do you find profit. We got to kind of go backwards and look a little bit about how do I find revenue first. So one of the ways that we find profit, one way is to take your total revenue and subtract total cost. Now remember, how do I find revenue? In order to find revenue, you take price times quantity. And so that's how we find out what our total revenue is. And you're typically given what the total cost is, but if we want to find out, one method of how to find profit is simply taking your total revenue, which is your price times your quantity, and subtracting total cost. So that's one method. Second method is to find overall profit. You could take your price and subtract the ATC from that, and then you multiply it by the quantity. And so one of the biggest things that we're going to focus on in this chapter is focusing on price and ATC. So from chapter 8, you learned about the short-run production costs, which includes the marginal cost, ABC, and ATC. The reason why we focus on that is because when we add price in, now we can establish what the profit is by looking at price and compare that to ATC, and the difference between there is the actual profit per unit. So taking your price and subtracting the ATC from that will give you your profit per unit. But if you go backwards one, to find your overall profit, you would take your profit per unit, which is price minus ATC, and multiply the quantity. Right? So in order to help you understand that better, you have a profit handout. And so what I'd like you to do is you're going to be pausing this in a moment or so. You're going to pause the video to actually complete the profit handout. And then there's a key that's already on your agenda, so you can check the key to make sure you're doing it correctly. If as you're doing these handouts, if as a table, if you don't understand something yourself, check with someone at your table. If no one at your table knows, you're going to have to go and ask someone else in the classroom to see if they know how to do it. But I'm going to give you one different tip as you do this profit handout. Remember, so as you get the profit handout, sorry, I dropped my handout. As you get the profit handout, this is what it looks like. And I'm not sure how close I am to the screen, how much you can see this. But you're simply going to find the marginal cost here first. And when you work in that marginal cost, well, you're given the total cost here, and you're given your change in output. So you should hopefully be able to find the marginal cost. Remember, marginal cost is change in total cost divided by change in output. But when you get down to complete this section, in order to find out what your revenue is, well, you're given the market price is $200. And remember, this is perfect competition. So in perfect competition, the price for one is the price for them all because your price is perfectly elastic. And so that means that the market price for everything is going to be $200. Well, remember what you also figured out here for marginal revenue in perfect competition. Since you have a perfectly elastic demand curve, and the reason was, again, because you're a price taker, you take the price from the industry. So each firm is going to sell the price for $200. Well, when you sell the second one, you're selling it for $200. And your third one, you're selling it for $200. And so as you look at that, what you find out is that the marginal revenue then is just going to be $200. This is your total revenue column. So you won't have 200 for each of these, but it'll be 200, 400, and so on and so forth. And so figure out what your profit is, and then you're going to want to answer the question at the very bottom. So this is the time if you want to stop the video, and then do the profit handout, and then start the video back up, and we'll go to the next stage. So I'll give you a moment to pause the video. All right, welcome back. All right, so that was kind of a long delay. Sorry, my clicker wasn't working very well. So we have to go back to chapter 7 before we go on here and do a little bit of a brief review about different types of economic profit. So I'll try to give a little bit of a summary here just to make sure that I bring that back to your frontal cortex again. But when you want to find economic profit is when the revenue that you have, the amount of revenue you make is more than any other alternative option. So that means if you actually were to find your total revenue, if you subtract your explicit and your implicit costs from that, which the total of both of those is your economic costs or your overall opportunity cost. So revenue minus economic costs is how we find profit. And so if you have an economic profit, it means that your revenue is more than all of your costs together, right? So if you end up having an economic profit, it means that there's nothing else that you can be doing with your business that you should be doing. You are doing exactly what you should be doing. And so if you want to find out, one of the easiest ways to do it is if your price line at your optimal quantity, and we'll show you some graphs in a few minutes, if your price at the optimal quantity is more than the ATC at that quantity, well, then you have an economic profit, and we'll show you how to graph that in a few minutes. If you have a normal profit means you take your revenue and you subtract your economic costs from that, but if that amount ends up being equal or to zero, that means you're earning a zero economic profit, so normal profit and zero economic profit are the same exact thing. And so if we go backwards here and look at how do I know if I have a normal profit, if at the optimal quantity, your price is equal to ATC, that means that the amount of revenue that you have coming in per unit is the same as the cost per unit. So the revenue per unit, if that equals the cost per unit, well, that means that you have a profit of zero. And so when a normal profit is the same exact thing as having a zero economic profit. And as you see here behind me, sorry, I'm standing in front of the words, I'm sorry. Your normal profit and economic profit, these two things are exactly the same thing. Right? So if we look at a negative economic profit means that you are not generating enough revenue to cover all of your explicit and implicit costs. So that means that what you should do as a business is consider doing something else. And if you have that, that means that your revenue is less than any other alternative, because your revenue is less than the total economic cost. And you can figure that out by doing the graphs. If your price is less than the ATC at the optimal quantity, and again, we're going to look at some graphs to help you show that. We'll look at some numbers as we go through here to help you see that as well. So when you look at this negative economic profit and you look at zero economic profit, what I want you to keep in mind is that we focus on price because price is the average revenue per unit, and we focus on ATC because that's our cost per unit. And as we go along here, you're gonna do some graphing with the pricing and at the optimal quantity, and you'll be able to establish if this firm is earning a profit, a normal profit, or a negative profit. Now the key thing is, some of you may be thinking about, wait a minute, if I have zero economic profit, why wouldn't I be changing out of my business because I'm not making any money? Well, remember, economic profit is different than accounting profit. So if you have accounting profit, that only includes your revenue minus your explicit costs, right? But so most businesses, all businesses, when you report to the IRS, all businesses will identify and be able to tell the government that this is how much profit we made. But they're only looking at their revenue and subtracting explicit costs from that. What they're not including is the implicit costs, what you're foregoing by doing your business. So economically, if you are making a negative economic profit, that means that you don't have enough revenue to cover explicit and implicit costs. What it means for you is that you may be making an accounting profit, but you're just not making an economic profit. You're not making enough revenue to cover all of those implicit costs of things that you're giving up. And so that's why if you have a zero economic profit or if you have a negative economic profit, that's why a business should consider doing something else, maybe exiting an industry. So that's what we'll kind of go through as we look at some of these examples. So here's where this big graph is, all right? So this looks like a very complicated graph. No, don't worry, you're never gonna have to really reproduce this. This shows you all of these different price points. I'm gonna talk about 1, 2, 3, and 4. I'm gonna talk about maybe 4 of these different price points. And you can see here that it says MR5 and MR4. Well, you have a perfectly elastic line here, because if you remember in perfect competition, because they're price takers, the price is perfectly elastic, and that if the price goes up by $10 for every single unit, your marginal revenue is $10. So in perfect competition, Mr. Dart, the MR equaled the demand, equaled price, and equals average revenue. So that's why if this is my price line, and it says price here, and it says MR, and it says MR over here, And so that means here, we are actually making a profit because my price at this quantity, my price is more than my ATC right here. So we're going to break down these different examples as we go through. So in the first one, if price is more than ATC, I gave that example. If price is equal to ATC, which is like this example right here, the firm is earning zero profit or a normal profit. And then if you go down to the bottom, if your price is less than ATC at the optimal quantity. So remember, so here's where my marginal cost curve is. Here's my marginal revenue. And so this is what my optimal quantity would be. But since it's less than the ATC, I'm actually making, I have a negative economic profit. And we can say the same thing about this one and about this one. And we'll get to later on, if you can notice right here, if you can see this marginal cost curve as a dotted line, I'll get to explain later on why this is a dotted line. So you will start graphing this. We're making an adjustment. You're going to graph your marginal cost curve, your ABC, your ATC, but we are going to actually put this marginal cost curve as a dotted line from here on out. And that will show a different kind of understanding, but I'll give you more details about that in a few minutes. All right, so let's look at some numbers. So we're going to do some calculations. I do believe in your notes packet, you have these numbers for you in your notes packet. And this is looking at numbers only for total numbers. We're not looking at average yet. Average is going to be in a couple slides. So this is just looking at total numbers. So if we look at total numbers, this is finding the profit maximizing output for a perfectly competitive firm using the total revenue and total cost approach. So you've been given in this graph, you've been given a bonus. And the bonus is you're actually given this profit and loss column. And so if you look at this profit and loss column, if I was to ask you, where do you maximize profit when you're given total revenue and total cost? Well, according to the numbers, it's hopefully easy enough for you to be able to pick out. Because if I say, where do you maximize profit? All you have to do is find where profit, this profit and loss areas, you have to find where this profit number is the highest point. So that's easy, but if you are not given that number, if you're given all of this stuff, but you're not given this, you can find this out, and all you have to do is figure out the difference between these two. If my cost outweighs revenue by $59, that's why I'm losing $59. And here, the difference is 8. My costs outweigh my revenue by $8, and so that's why it's negative 8. And if you go all the way through here, you see the difference between at a quantity of 9, the difference is $299. So that means in this example, the optimal quantity would be 9, the quantity would be 9. And if we, again, did not have this column, you could figure that out by looking and finding the greatest difference between these two. That's how you end up finding that. And this is just a calculation. If you're looking at graphically, you would actually find this. And so I'm going to show this to you graphically, and then I'm going to give you some, I'll erase it, and I'll give you some more different tips on the left-hand side here. But if I was to draw my total revenue in perfect competition, since marginal revenue, it goes up by the same amount every single time. Remember, marginal revenue is going to be a perfectly elastic line. So what I ask you is you can kind of pause for a second and think about this. If you need to pause the video to think, you can do that. What would total revenue look like if my marginal revenue is a perfectly elastic line? Pausing to think. Your total revenue is going to be linear. It's just, if there's no longer a curve to it, because my MR goes up, my MR is perfectly elastic, it's constant. And so this goes up by the same number every single time. That's why it looks like this. Well, now what we do is let's add in our total cost. And if you think about what total cost looks like, total cost looks like this, right? So here's my total cost column. And so, if I was to, so I'm just kind of, I'm just estimating what that total cost is, but we drew our total cost curve like this. Increasing at a decreasing rate, increasing at an increasing rate. And if you want to find out graphically where this quantity 9 is, wherever the greatest difference is between total revenue and total cost, that would be my optimal quantity for the firm. And then if we go beyond that, now my total profit gets less and less and less because the difference between total revenue and total cost is shrinking. All right, so that's graphically how to do this. And so in your margins, you may want to add this in here so you can get what that looks like graphically. And again, if you need to do that, go ahead and pause the video, and while you're going to add that graph into there. And then once you're then I'm just going to continue going. So if we go back and if we look at this, I'm going to ask you a few different questions off these numbers. And I think that these questions are in your notes packet. I don't remember off the top of my head. Why is there a loss of $100 at a quantity of 0? Right? So if you look at a quantity of 0, there is a loss over here of $100. And why is that? Well, because I don't have any revenue. And the reason I don't have any revenue is I'm not selling anything or making anything. And so if I'm not selling anything, my revenue is 0. And if I have a total cost of $100, that's why I'm losing $100. And if you ask yourself, well, hey, self, why is there a total cost of $100 for not producing anything? Well, remember, anytime you're at a quantity of 0 and you have something in the total cost, that's fixed cost. Because even if you're shutting down, you still have to pay for your fixed costs. And so that answers that question. So fixed cost is $100. So what quantity is the profit maximizing? We already went through this. The quantity is 9. It's when total revenue is more than total cost by the greatest margin. And so my question to you is this. Why do we not produce 10? Well, looking at this, the simplest answer would be, well, because at a quantity of 10, my profit is no longer maximized. My profit actually dropped by $19. And so, and total revenue is still more than total cost because we're still making a profit, but it's more than it by a smaller number. 280 is smaller than 299. And so we aren't at the point where my total revenue is more than total cost by the greatest margin. All right, so that's the analysis as you look at for the total revenue and total cost approach. So here's kind of a summary of what that is. And I'll go through this kind of quickly. And if you need to pause the video to kind of jot the things down, go ahead and pause the video. But if total revenue is more than total cost at any time, if I go back here and look at this, my total revenue is more than total cost. Total revenue is more than total cost. Every time total revenue is more than total cost, that means you're profitable. If your total revenue is equal to total cost, that means you're breaking even because the total of money I have coming in is the same as the amount of money going out. That means I break even. And if you look at this point right here, where are we incurring a loss? We have a loss when your total revenue is less than total cost. So very simply, this is the simplest way to find profit, but the challenge is you will typically not be given these total numbers. So a firm is maximizes profit when total revenue is more than total cost by the greatest margin. Right? So that's one example. Now this is the one that you will use most often and be able to determine where something is. And so if you think back to the test that you may have just taken, you may have seen a problem like this that you had to calculate, and then later on in the final, you will be given numbers like this, and I will ask you, what's the profit maximizing price? What's the profit maximizing quantity? How much profit are they making? You will have to do all that kind of calculations, and I have some handouts that you will actually practice that and some activities where you'll practice that as well. So let's go through and let's analyze this. So what quantity is my profit maximized? If we're working with MR and MC, remember from the last video, it said that you maximize profit where MR equals MC. Remember that if you're before that, you're foregoing some revenue because you stopped too short. And if you go past that, now my profit is going down because my marginal cost outweighs my marginal revenue, right? So get your head around that again. I'm looking at maximizing my profit. So looking at this information, and again, I'll try to stand in front of this and so you can't see these numbers, right? But if you're looking at the video, or if you're looking at your actual laptop and the slide so you can see it, but if you look at this information, you can't find what this profit and loss is. Well, these are the same numbers, and so the answer is the same, right? The answer ends up being 9, and the reason is because that's when marginal revenue is still more than marginal cost. Now remember, if they don't equal, but marginal revenue is more than marginal cost. Think back to the method that I gave you in the last video. How do I find the profit maximizing quantity if I'm given MR and MC? Well, what you have to do is you go down, look at your MR and MC columns, and you keep going down until the very first time marginal cost outweighs marginal revenue. which is an output of 10. And so since marginal cost outweighs marginal revenue, you go up 1. And that is the tried and true method for you every single time. Remember, MR equals MC is where the profit maximizing quantity, and we're going to do some graphing in a little bit to show you the graphs behind that. All right, so in a couple of more questions we'll look at. Why did the profit increase by $1 at a quantity of 9? Okay, so I want you to think about that. If you need to pause the video, pause it, and then start it back up and I'll give you the answer. So the reason why profit increased by $1 at a quantity of 9 is because my marginal revenue was more than my marginal cost by $1. And so my profit was $2.98, so I add the $1 to this, and I got to $2.99. And so that's how every time this is more by $51, that's why this went up by $51. So just showing you how this thing works and how profit is established. Even though, and so I'm going to pause here. Here's one of the mistakes that some people make when they do MR and MC. Some students think that I have to look for the greatest difference between these two. Just like you did on the last slide, or the numbers, that was total revenue and total cost. But that's the method when you have total revenue and total cost. You look for the greatest difference. Here, you don't do that. This is a difference of, 61, this is a difference of 71. This is a difference of 61 if my quick math is good. So according to that method, you would produce 4 units only. Well, look at what you're missing out on. If you stopped at 4 because this is the greatest margin, look at all this extra profit that you'd be missing out on. That's an under allocation of resources. So don't find the greatest difference between MR and MC. Find the time when MR is equal to MC, or MR is more than MC at the very last output, very last product, which is again 9, right? And so because if I go to 10, my product is more than that. So I kind of covered this. Why not a quantity of 10? It's not a quantity of 10 because your marginal cost is more than marginal revenue. So last question. Why did your profit decrease by $19 at a quantity of 10? So I'll give you a moment to think about that. Look at the numbers, look at what's here, pause the video, and see if you can't come up with the answer of why that happened. Pause. Hello, welcome back. And so if you look at the reason why this went down by 19 is look at the difference between these two numbers. Marginal cost outweighed marginal revenue by $19. And so that's why my profit went down by $19. This is how you have to read these numbers to understand this. You'll have some practice calculating it, and then I will ask you questions about how do you actually do this and how do you go through that. Okay, so that really summarizes that really kind of provides that information. This is the summary here for how do we determine profit if we are in the MR and MC area. So when we look at this example right here, if we go back to this, if my MR is $131 for all of these, what it means is that, well, let me ask you this, what's the price in this example? Well, the price in this example is $131 because remember, price equals MR because the line is perfectly elastic. MR is always the same thing as price for perfect competition. The next chapter, it's not going to be the same. So we can't focus on that yet. We only focus on this because there's no price effect. We don't have to reduce the price in all previous units and lose revenue because every single product that I sell for the same exact amount. So my price is $131. So all I would do is if you want to figure out am I making a profit or not, let's compare here. I'm losing money. Well, I'm losing money because my MR is less than ATC. So when your price is less than ATC, you have an economic loss. But if you look at where we don't have a normal profit here, but where do I have an economic profit? Well, all of these have an economic profit because $131 is more than every single one of those. So we're going to graph that in a few minutes, and in the next video, we're going to graph that. But what we're also going to be able to see as we go through here is that if the price is greater than ATC at the optimal quantity, which is at a quantity of 9, $131 is more than 97.78. If you actually find if we were to calculate $2.99, here's what you can do. And you can pause the video to do this calculation. Do the calculation and figure out what's the difference between 131 and 97.78. Right? So I'll give you a moment to do that. Find out, subtract 97.78 from $131. And the number you get is $133.22, I do believe. If you multiply that times 9, you should get $299. And so that's how we find profit. And so when you go back here, this is one of those things in your notes, highlight it, circle it, underline it, write it in all caps or something. A firm is maximizing its profit when MR equals MC. So that's the key thing right there. These are also really, really, really important. All right, so as you go through here, I just skipped ahead a little bit. I'm going to have a different video for that. As you go through and figure out how do we find profit by looking at the actual numbers, I'm going to have you do an activity, I think. So we'll kind of check with your agenda. So after this video, you could do an activity to do some calculations, and then you could answer some of the questions based off of your calculations and be able to understand how much profit do I have, where's my optimal quantity, things of that nature. So I'm going to pause it. I'm going to stop this video, and the next video is going to be how do I graph all this stuff to show it. Okay? Peace.